these weathered ones are something very, very special. Well, hello there to you. I really hope I find you well. It's great to see you again. Welcome back to the loft here on Weir Yard. I'm Jennifer Kirk, and today I'm going to be guiding you through 4 wagons that I've picked up from the latest Bachmann quarterly announcement. Now, you may have heard me on the Monday Club from time to time talking about these, and it's the pre-weathered wagons from Bachmann, particularly the 16-ton mineral wagons. Now, these are something that I've been a huge fan of since Bachmann upgraded their weathering applications a little while back, actually, a few years ago. But this is the latest tranche of releases, and the pre-release photographs really did look something special. So come with me and let's see, do they live up to expectations? And of course, as always, you'll find a link in the description box down below which takes you to Rails of Sheffield, where you can find these wagons and all the others from the Bachmann range announcements. In the last quarter's announcement from Bachmann, what really did catch my eye were the 16-ton mineral wagons that come ready weathered. Now, a few years ago, Bachmann really did up their game on this front and introduced printed weathering that really did look so much better than a blowover with an airbrush that we'd had before. So when I saw these in the catalogue, there's 3 different single wagons plus a pack of 3. Now, I've bought the 3 single wagons and I've got them here. Now, based on the images that were released by Bachmann, these look to be something special. And I've been telling people on the Monday Club now for probably a month or more that these were the ones to get, that if they turned up looking just like the pictures, then they were sure to be an absolute hit. Now, what I have to say is when they've arrived, they don't actually look like the livery samples that appeared to be in the pictures. And in particular, if I just look for the catalogue number, this particular one, 37-250J, I've actually gone and searched out through Google some images of what was actually posted up for what was forthcoming. And this was the livery which I was probably most looking forward to. Now, as you can see, when it's come, it looks completely different. Now, I've done a Google search and I'm actually struggling to find out whether that was an older photograph maybe of a model which I might have missed when it was first released, and I can't find any evidence of that particular livery having actually been produced. It may also be the case that Bachmann found that printing that was prohibitively expensive. It featured flaking paint, rust, all manner of features that really did look something special in that picture. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not disappointed by the wagons that have come through from them. They're just not quite the pictures that were shown in advance. I've also picked up, you just see down here reflecting the light, one of the Sand Tippler wagons in its later engineer's guise as a ZDV. Would be something like a spoil wagon, and these Tippler wagons were actually well suited for this because spent ballast is quite dense, and with the lower sides, of course, because sand itself is very, very dense, these could actually be loaded up and wouldn't end up being overloaded because of the lower sides. So they were one of the particular wagon types that did find favour in the engineer's fleet. Now, I'm going to look at that one in a bit, so I'm just going to push that one to one side. I'm just going to move these wagons over, and I'm just going to show you from my collection. These are the wagons that Bachmann have done in the past using this technique with the, I call it tampo printing, but I'm not sure whether actually it is tampo printing anymore. And as you can see, that for the shrewd collector over the years, there have been plenty of these wagons introduced, and they are all different. So Bachmann have not succumbed to the temptation of reusing some of the printing tools to do the same pattern of rust, and that is something which I did check thoroughly, and none of these three new wagons have patterns of rust that correspond to any of these other wagons. So that is really, really good, because you can build up a rake of wagons with this different patterns of rust and decrepitude, and they really do look something incredibly special. I have a love of this particular wagon, and I will confess this now, that the Bachmann 16-ton mineral wagon is probably my favourite wagon design that's been released ready to run. That's one of the reasons why I keep buying them. I've got somewhere in excess of 80 different running numbers of these. They've been a seminal giver from the Bachmann range, so it's nice to see them getting yet another outing. There were hundreds of thousands of these built by British Rail, and started out as a design that was built for the Ministry of Supply, the Ministry of War Transportation, during the Second World War, to replace some of those aging wooden-bodied wagons. And that design found favour with British Rail, well, British Railways as what then was, and they continue to build these very, very quickly, looking to supplant the wooden-bodied coal wagons that they'd inherited in the nationalisation of 1948. So these are the three which I've actually purchased. We've got 37-250J, 37227B, and 37225J. So as you can see from these, I mean, J, Bachmann do the production run, and then every time they introduce a new updated livery, different running number on the same base wagon, it acquires an extra suffix letter, and then that goes from A through to, well, I suppose ultimately up to Z. But with these, we've already reached letter J. The 37-227 has only got to B, so we've got a variety of different details, different end doors, whether they're pressed or whether they're ribbed. We've got with and without top flap doors, and a whole host of other little minor detail differences. None of these are actually vacuum braked, but there are vacuum braked versions, and there's a little bit of mixing and matching between some of those as well. Given my collection, it has to be said that I tend to now be a little bit pickier about the ones that I pick up. So these weathered ones are something very, very special. So I do tend to pick these up, and let's get these out of the box. I'm also a bit of a sucker for tops codes, so anything that has the letter codes from the mid to late 70s onwards of MCO, MCV and MXV, which were the codes for the 16-ton mineral wagons, I do tend to pick those up as well. So these three wagons, there's not really much to say about these that hasn't already been said in my previous reviews of this type of wagon. The moulding is still looking pretty fine. There's no flash, there's no smudging of the detail, which would have signified worn out tooling. And I suspect that because these are such money makers for Bachmann, they do still sell in huge quantities, being released year after year, that the tools do get renewed as and when necessary, as this pretty much is the bread and butter of their wagon range. These particular wagons are released with running numbers that have not been released before, and what we actually appear to have there is actually one of the lower running numbers, 62549, so that's 62,549, and certainly if we look at the other wagon here, we've got 89,616. And the final wagon from this trio is 42,524. And when we compare that to some of the previous releases, these have tended to be of the six-figure variety. They're 150,998. So it's just nice to see some of the lower running numbered wagons being released. And these tend to be with the top flap doors, which tended to be discounted and not fitted with later builds. Also, these wagons tended to get rebodied an awful lot, so it isn't necessarily the case that wagons with a low number would always have top flap doors, and certainly by the early 1980s, any surviving wagons would tend to be running without top flap doors. On this particular wagon, we've got the pressed steel ends, and you can see there it's just the production technique of the original wagons. These end panels would have been pressed on a press rather than riveted together, and it just gives you that very, very unique and distinctive end door style, which I compare to that with the ribbing. You can see the difference between the two. We've also got this wagon is marked with the central V, and that's for the bottom doors, which, as you can see here on this wagon without, those are missing. So it's really nice to see little detail differences such as those being included in these wagons. All the wagons come with NEM-pocketed slimline tension lock couplings. The buffers are not sprung, but it doesn't really matter. And the underframe detail is pretty nice. And it's one of the other areas as well where the Bachmann wagons do have a number of detail differences. So we've got there a wagon that has brakes on both sides, and one of them here you can see has brake shoes only on one side. And just looking at that third wagon there, brake shoes on both sides. And so you can see that there's a lot of subtle differences with these. The livery application on these, whilst not matching the photographs that were shared online before the models came through, is still really, really well done. We don't have that multiple shades of grey that the original images shared had, which implied a wagon that had been patch painted and a lot of paint had lifted over time. But those rust patches done by printing the wagon rather than actually spraying it really do come through exceptionally well. Looking to the other wagons as well, completely different patterns of rust. We've got a variety here from heavily weathered wagons to those which, whilst still quite rusty, and if your car looked like that, I think you'd be very displeased, they are still in what would be deemed a fairly reasonable state of repair. Final wagon there as well. The attention to detail on these rust patches suggests to me that these are probably copied from photographs of real wagons taken at some point in time, and I really like the way that you can see the rust around the edges of the panel and just corresponding with the kind of wear and tear that a wagon would receive being bashed around in its frontline use. Looking now to the fourth wagon that I've picked up from these particular announcements, we've got 37-357 BR 13-ton ZDV steel Sand Tippler BR bauxite weathered. Now, the Sand Tipplers have not as yet received the same sort of weathering treatment that the 16-ton mineral wagons have had, but certainly these do look really nice nonetheless. I'm particularly impressed by the livery application here. Whilst it's weathered, it is a light weathering, and you can see that there's a lot going on with the printing on the sides of these wagons. Even under very close magnification, we don't see any fuzziness. It's actually one of the cleanest applications that I've seen in quite some time. What you can also see there is the black panels on the wagon side denote where a previous livery and data panels have been painted over in a patch paintwork, and then the addition of the engineer's writing doesn't necessarily go neatly over those panels, just like the real wagon. This is actually a really pleasing bread and butter release from Bachmann, and I'm really pleased to add it to my fleet. Overall, with these wagons, I have to say, for me, the fundamental wagons are great. You really can't go wrong with the 16-ton minerals from Bachmann, and indeed the 13-ton Sand Tippler wagon as well is a really good, solid model that has given decades of frontline service in the range and looks no sign of being superseded detail-wise any time yet. It just shows that these wagons were ahead of their time when they were introduced in the very, very late 1990s and still hold their own to this day. The only detraction that I can find is that they don't resemble the pictures that were circulated online prior to the models coming through. And if you were staking your hat on what they looked like in those pictures, then you might be a little bit disappointed. But for me, I'm still happy to add these to my collection, and they will be right at home with the other 80 plus of my 16-ton mineral wagons. And I'm really, really happy to be able to increase the number that I have available to run. Well, I hope you really enjoyed this video, and of course we've got that link in the description box down below taking you to Rails of Sheffield, the UK stockists for these items. And don't forget to tickle that like button, and of course sharing is caring. Share this video and let others know about what we've been up to here. And you can also head on over to Patreon if you wish to support the channel and help us to keep making the videos that you want to see. And I do look forward to reading all of your comments down below. I might not get a chance to respond to them all, but I certainly do read them and love to hear from you guys to see what you thought about today's models under review. But until next time, you take great care of yourself, stay safe and happy modelling, and I'll see you here next time. Bye for now. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Graham Foster, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, and NI Railways 4000 class. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.